Well, we just wrapped up with what I thought was going to be a really lame Thursday night football game, and it kind of turned out to be exactly that. This was not the most entertaining game, obviously, the Jets and the Patriots. The Jets just whooped the Patriots up and down the field, literally all night. That game was all Jets. I mean, there literally was no bright spots for the New England Patriots tonight. We're going to go through everything fantasy football related, give my instant reaction to it. Starting out with the Patriots side of the ball, because obviously this was not a fully fantasy contributor game as far as the Patriots options go. There was not a lot of fantasy contributors on the Patriots side of the ball. The best guy still maintained to be what you would expect, Ramondre Stevenson. And he didn't even do what he usually does in most games that he's done this year. I mean, here's what he did tonight. What Ramondre Stevenson did tonight was 6 carries for 23 total yards. So that's 3.8 yards per carry. And listen, he ended up leaving that game, I think early in the, late in the first half, he ended up just getting out of that game. Came back later, just still wasn't very involved. I mean, their game script quickly flipped against them, so they really didn't have a ton of time to do too much with it. But we'll kind of go through how the game script went in a little bit. Antonio Gibson continues to be involved for a second straight week. He ended up getting 3 catches for 8 yards and 5 carries for 29 yards. So he was way more efficient than Ramondre Stevenson was. Again, I think game script had a lot to do with that. Drake May obviously came in at the end, and he looked like a rookie. Drake May came in, and he was 4 for 8 on 22 yards. 2 carries for 12 yards. I mean, really, you can't take too much away from Drake May, particularly because Drake May, getting thrown into the game, with, 3 minutes left when they had the ball back, and just giving him that kind of opportunity, that's not going to work out particularly well for any quarterback who hasn't seen any NFL action. He got hit a couple times too, but dude can run. I will give Drake May that. He can definitely run, and he can escape the pocket pretty well. So he's going to have mobility that Jacoby Brissett just doesn't offer. If the Patriots were to go to Drake May at some point, I'm not sure if they will or not, but I'm just saying that Drake May, if he does go, he will provide some sort of rushing upside that maybe could create a spark in that Patriots offense, but obviously he didn't do much. Demario Douglas actually came out. He had the best game on the Patriots side of the ball in fantasy. 7 catches for 69 yards and added a rush for 9 yards. So Demario Douglas actually comes out with a decent game. Decent in best ball. He was actually a decent best ball guy this week. And Jalen Polk obviously did nothing. I mean, literally nobody else did anything, including Hunter Henry, who a lot of people asked me earlier today, even in the live stream for the game, should I be playing Hunter Henry this week? I said no. Don't play Hunter Henry because I'm not on board with, this Patriots offense, and I think tonight proved it. To stay on the Patriots offense, their offense is just not very good. I mean, what we saw tonight is a lot of what I thought we would see for the duration of the season. Just so happened those first 2 games, they actually looked pretty decent. That first game against the Bengals, obviously the Bengals in week 1, they're just proving over the years with Joe Burrow to be really bad. And in week 2, they end up getting to play the Seahawks, who they actually played pretty decently well. Maybe that should raise questions about the Seahawks defense. I don't know. I'm not willing to go that far quite yet, but it's definitely worth questioning because the Jets tonight, they came in and just there was no hope, no life at all for the Patriots tonight. And I just think that the Patriots, the reason I don't like Ramondre, and I got flack as I expected yesterday when I ranked Ramondre Stevenson, I think in the 20s area, I think he was my number 20 running back. I got flack for that. And people were like, why is he so low? He should not be this low. And I think a lot of it just has to do with me telling my audience, the reason I don't like Ramondre Stevenson long-term in fantasy is because I think what we'll see is a lot of what we just saw tonight, where they get negative game scripts and they just can't run the ball with Ramondre Stevenson. If they're in competitive games, Ramondre's a good back. The problem is not the talent here. The problem is the team isn't good. And the other problem, which if you watch the game was evident, their offensive line is, I think it's got to be the worst in the league. I mean, it is horrible. If it's not theirs, it's the Bears. Those two offensive lines are absolutely atrocious. So I just think that the Patriots are going to see a lot more games like this as the year goes, and tonight may have just been the tip of the iceberg. So going over to the Jets side of the ball, the Jets have some pretty good options this year. I mean, Rodgers was on fire. Rodgers was on fire tonight, 27 and 35, 280 yards for 2 touchdowns. So obviously Rodgers actually comes through with a pretty decent fantasy game. I mean, that's not decent. That's a really good fantasy performance right there. So Rodgers comes through, ends up playing really well in fantasy this week. And really, it doesn't surprise me that he ended up playing really well in fantasy because, let's pull up his exact numbers right here. I can't get him just yet, but Rodgers obviously, just based on his stat line, that's a good fantasy performance right here for Aaron Rodgers. And again, he had time to throw, and he actually did escape the pocket a couple times, make some good throws down the field. I mean, that dude is going to be able to throw until he's 50, I think. The problem is really moving forward with Rodgers in fantasy is when they face tougher pass rushes, that's going to be a problem. Like what he saw against the 49ers, right? Like he was way more under siege that night than he was tonight. That's going to be the ultimate problem here with Aaron Rodgers, I think, is when he does face those kind of defenses in the future, I don't think it goes as smoothly. Now, his receiving options, Tyler Conklin comes through. Finally puts up a good performance. 5 of 93. He got 5 catches for 93 yards. So, Tyler Conklin was a tight end I was low-key in on. Like at the start of the year, I actually drafted him a decent amount in best ball drafts, so I'm actually happy with some best ball teams tonight. With Tyler Conklin, I mean, he came through and really served a role that I think he can serve for Aaron Rodgers a decent portion of the season, which is that he's going to get those flat routes out in the flat, couple of yards down the field, and even some throws over the middle as well. He averaged 18.6 yards per reception tonight. So Tyler Conklin ends up having a really good game at the tight end position, and most people probably did not play him. I did not tell you should play him in most situations, so not blaming anybody for it, but I don't think I would have done the same. I think I would have done the same thing too. One thing that did stick out to me tonight, and I've watched the Jets every game of the Jets, and they're really fascinating to me. Allen Lazard still continues to be a really important option for Aaron Rodgers. Now, with Allen Lazard, I don't numbers don't back him up being the number one read. Like, he's not always the number one read. There's plays designed for Allen Lazard, and seems to me like whenever a play doesn't go the way it's supposed to, Allen Lazard becomes Aaron Rodgers' number one. Like, he's the guy that Rodgers looks to in times of duress when something doesn't go right. So that definitely is something. And that honestly does keep Allen Lazard involved in fantasy. And tonight, 3 receptions for 48 yards, and he obviously got a touchdown tonight. So again, for those who have him in best ball, ended up being a good option. And for those who may have flexed him in deeper leagues tonight, Allen Lazard ended up being a pretty decent play. Now, hopefully you didn't put him in the flex spot because you don't want to put a Thursday night player in your flex. But Lazard, I think the point I'm trying to tell you is that I think he's actually going to be involved for a decent portion of the season in this type of capacity. He will give you bad games like he gave you last week, but he's also going to give you these games where he scores a touchdown, or maybe he even gets like 7 catches for like 60 yards or something like that, and is a legitimate option at the flex position. Now, Mike Williams actually comes out. He shows his face a little bit tonight. Mike Williams, 3 catches on 30 for 34 yards. Like, that's a good performance to come back and get Mike Williams involved. He was obviously not involved really at all against the 49ers. Minimally involved last week against the Titans. Mike Williams comes through tonight and almost had a touchdown catch. I mean, he had a touchdown catch. Should have had it, just never corralled it in the back of the end zone. It was good coverage on that play, but he could have had a touchdown, which could have been good for people who wanted a spike week from Mike Williams this week. But overall, I think Mike Williams came back and made some plays. Like, he did have some good catches in that game, contested as well. Garrett Wilson saves his performance with a touchdown. That's Garrett Wilson's reality this week, is that he had 5 catches for 33 yards and a touchdown. So I'm not going to go wild on Garrett Wilson, because I do think, like, when you when you really look at it, Garrett Wilson did not do anything spectacular in this game. Garrett Wilson, again, I'm not seeing the target population here, but I think he had probably close to like 8 or 9 targets in this game, and it wasn't anything particularly great. It's still a little concerning for sure in fantasy football, because the one thing that I do want to see with Garrett Wilson is Garrett Wilson get more downfield targets. And he hasn't gotten a ton of those, and he didn't tonight. So I'm looking for more emphasis. The one touchdown play he did catch, that was definitely designed for him. Like, Rodgers looked to him from the start of that play, and Rodgers threw a great ball. Like, on that touchdown catch, I don't know if y'all saw that, Rodgers threw a fantastic ball over to Garrett Wilson. That throw could not have been better. It was literally the tightest spiral in the only place that Garrett Wilson could have caught it, and only Garrett Wilson alone. And obviously, Garrett Wilson, very good receiver, comes down with the catch. So I'm hoping we see more of those schemed plays for Garrett Wilson as the season goes at the goal line, and I'm hoping we see more downfield production from Garrett Wilson. I did notice at some points there was a throw that was a back shoulder intended throw for Garrett Wilson, and their timing was just off. Their timing was off, and it looked like Rodgers was looking for him to turn around earlier, and Wilson just wasn't turning around yet. There was another throw. Rodgers was a little short on it was a down the seam throw, and Rodgers just didn't connect with him. So I think that, again, the reason I called Garrett Wilson a buy low guy is because the opportunity is there for Garrett Wilson. It's going to continue to be there because they're starting to connect a little bit more. They're trying to get him involved. There's a direct mandate to get him involved. And so I do think that Garrett Wilson still is a pretty good buy low, potentially heading into next week, depending on how your league mate's Garrett Wilson manager feels about what his performance was. Now, our running backs here. Our running backs, both of them had a really good day. Breece Hall and Braelon Allen were very involved in this game. Braelon Allen had 11 carries, 55 yards, averaging 5 yards a carry. Breece averaged 3.4 yards a carry, 16 carries, 54 yards. Obviously, Breece comes away with the touchdown, and Breece is also involved as a receiver. 4 catches for 29. Braelon had some dump-offs too, 3 for 13. I'll tell you what, like I told a lot of people, I had a lot of questions about Braelon Allen before the game. Whether you could play him, whether you could flex him maybe, what the scenario was with that. And ultimately, I opted to tell most people, don't flex Braelon Allen this game. I am curious what the game plan is going to be in the future with Braelon Allen and Breece Hall. Because Braelon's playing really well to the point where it's like, you kind of can't ignore the guy. Like, last week, he averaged almost 5 yards carry. This week, he averaged 5 yards carry. He's been really good for them. Like, he comes in and gives a really good punch to that offense whenever Breece needs a breather or something like that. And I don't think that Breece's volume's going anywhere. I don't think his explosion has gone anywhere. This could just legitimately be a really good dynamic two-back system. Now, obviously, that would hurt Breece Hall's production in fantasy because theoretically, like, he'll lose carries, and he'll also probably lose out on several targets that he could be getting if he was in on certain third downs. Braelon Allen, though, like, the one thing I'm questioning is, like, is there an injury maybe with Breece Hall? Like, he was formally on the injury report this week, I think, heading into the week. They just, like, he practiced all week, so it wasn't ever like, is he going to miss the game? That was never a concern. He practiced all week, so they obviously weren't concerned with him missing games. I am curious, though, what the future is going to hold with these two running backs in particular. Because if Braelon maintains this involvement, Breece Hall can't be the RB1 anymore in my rankings. Like, just because he doesn't monopolize the backfield. So 2 straight good games, you can't really ignore Braelon Allen at this point. That's why it's going to be tough. I don't really know if I see them backing off on Braelon Allen's work in the future because he's been really good for them. So it'll be really interesting to watch how that Jets backfield goes for the rest of the year. And I do think there's good potential for both of them. Like, they're both obviously really good running backs. So we'll have to see how this one plays out, man. But that was tonight's game. Not a ton of fireworks. The Jets crushed the Patriots. obviously. So we'll open it up to some questions to end out the night here tonight. We'll start from the top. Steve 562, what's going on? Got offered Carr for Jay Hill. What's the move? Jay Hill, I'm assuming you're saying Justice Hill. If it's for Justin Hill, like I think that in this scenario, if you got offered Carr for Justice Hill, I think that ultimately with Derek Carr, there's just not much. Like, if you have a quarterback right now that you feel comfortable with, like, let's say you have, Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray, it's like, I don't really see a ton of need in most platforms and in most scoring, not scoring systems, in most platforms and in most formats. Like, I don't know if I see a need for having another quarterback. Justice Hill is a cheap price, though. So I will say that if that's the offer that you're getting for Carr, if you're struggling at quarterback in any way, like, Carr's an instant start this week at the very least. Justice Hill is a handcuff to Derrick Henry for now. We'll see what happens when Keaton Mitchell returns for the Baltimore Ravens, because when Keaton Mitchell returns, that will change things probably. So it'll be interesting to see. I would probably say that I would take Derek Carr over Justice Hill, though. Yeah. Live Creation says Garrett Wilson is a buy low, still elite numbers on routes run. That's right. That's exactly how I feel. That's exactly how I feel right now with Garrett Wilson. I think that he proved it tonight. Like, the guy is still involved in that offense to a point where we can kind of count on that target share continuing to be there for Garrett Wilson. So I believe he's still a buy low. Him and Rodgers are really at a point where they're still definitely working out chemistry. Like I said, there was 2 throws to Garrett Wilson that stuck out to me tonight. One of them was to Garrett Wilson, like 15, 20 yards down the sideline. It was supposed to be a back shoulder throw at the sideline. Garrett Wilson was expecting a deeper downfield back shoulder throw. Rodgers was expecting him to look earlier. So Rodgers had already let the ball go by the time Garrett Wilson was even thinking about looking back. So that was one. The other one that stuck out to me was Garrett Wilson on the sidelines, and Rodgers threw it towards the seam, so towards the middle of the field. And that made me think, I think Rodgers put that there intentionally. Rodgers is so accurate that it's I don't think he makes a ton of mistakes, right? I think that he's just so accurate that he made that throw on purpose. He was expecting Garrett Wilson to be there. I could be wrong, but those are the 2 throws that stuck out to me tonight. And make sure to like this video if you guys are getting value from it tonight, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. And if you have questions, we'll end out with some questions tonight. Anton Montez, what's going on? Is Ridley and Javonte too much for James Conner? I don't think so. No, I mean, Javonte is I don't know anybody who knows. I don't know anybody who would put Javonte Williams in their starting lineup. Calvin Ridley for James Conner, I think is fine. I think that's just fine. So Javonte really kind of is just a depth piece at this point in fantasy. I think that James Conner is worth that personally. I think that that's something I would personally do. Let's see what else we've got going on. Yeah, live creation. I'm curious of this too. Who started Tyler Conklin tonight? I am genuinely curious about that question. Because most people, I don't think, started James Conner tonight. Matt Wingo, what's going on? Which side would you take? Jamar Chase, likely Christian Kirk, or Laporta, Dell, and Braelon Allen? I think I would take the Jamar side. Yeah, because Jamar, listen, Kirk to me is a throwaway player. I have no interest in having Kirk on my roster. Honestly, at this point, I think Kirk is a cut. Try to sell Kirk and see what kind of value he has, but I don't think that Christian Kirk has much of any value. So I'm not convinced of it at all that he has any kind of value at this point in fantasy. Ultimately, I do think that the other side of this trade with Dell, Tank Dell obviously is a good player, but he's not better than Jamar. And as far as I'm concerned, like Laporta will be good in fantasy. He will be really good. It just hasn't happened yet. But when I can get the chance to get somebody like a Jamar Chase on my side, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do that with Jamar Chase, especially before this week, because I think this is the last week you could buy him for this kind of price right here. Laporta, Dell, and Braelon Allen, I don't think is going to be a trade many people would make after this week when he plays the Commanders. And like I said in the rankings video, if he doesn't hit against the Commanders, we'll have some serious reevaluation to do with Jamar Chase. Efren Gramajo, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. I am a Breece owner. Time to trade for Braelon Allen. You know, it's really funny, actually, earlier today, in a Dynasty League, I traded for Braelon Allen. And I'm kind of glad I did tonight, because I feel like after tonight, he would have been more expensive. You know, I would say that it's probably in your best interest to trade for Braelon Allen. Because Braelon Allen, like I was saying at the beginning of this video, Braelon Allen may be a little bit more than just a handcuff back. Like, I thought last week was kind of not a fluke, but an unusual game, because I watched that game and Breece Hall looked like he had gotten injured a little bit. So I was thinking, like, maybe it's because, like, they're just trying, like, maybe it's just because they're trying to take it easy with Breece Hall right now. And, like, I still think that's possible, that, like, he may have some sort of injury they're just doing that with. But the reality is, like, if he had come in the past two games, Braelon Allen, if he had come in the past two games and been mediocre, like averaged like 3.5 yards a carry, then it's a lot easier to put him back on the bench as soon as Breece is 100%. But Braelon Allen has come in 2 games now and been really efficient and really good, providing a big explosion whenever Breece gets off the field. So to me, it's in your best interest to get Braelon Allen at this point. I will say, don't go in too desperate, because people will sniff that out. Like, you don't want to go in too desperate with this one. I wouldn't do it after tonight, because obviously it's fresh. Everybody just saw what Braelon Allen did. It's a really fresh time to go out and try to trade for Braelon Allen. It's not something I would recommend doing personally. I would probably wait maybe till like Saturday or Sunday or maybe Monday to trade for Braelon Allen. That's what I would personally do, is just give it a few days off the game and kind of let people calm down from it. But right now, people are at the very least, he has piqued people's curiosity. That's why we're talking. Like, I've seen a lot of chats about Braelon Allen already in my video tonight. And I haven't even looked at X yet. Like, I haven't looked at X/Twitter yet. So, you know, whenever I do, I'm sure I'll see a lot of Braelon Allen talk. So, I would say it's in your best interest, but don't do it right away. And again, appreciate the super chat. If you guys have questions, I'm going to answer some tonight. The best way to get your question answered immediately is to do a super chat. Nino Pena, what's going on? Just got offered Jettis and James Cook for My Rice, DJ Moore, and Gibbs. It's a good, I mean, it's a high-end trade, obviously. You know, here's my thing. Typically, when it comes to, like, trades involving big names like this, I think what I personally like to do is I need to know what your current team record is. Because if you're sitting at 0-2 or a shaky 101, I'm more on board with shaking it up a little bit. I'm totally more on board with you know, making some new moves to maximize, like, your team's needs and your roster construction. If you're 2-0 and you're getting this offer, though, I don't believe personally in making changes to something that's working like this. Now, if you had, let's say Cooper Kupp, right? If you have Cooper Kupp, or if you had Puka Nacua or Christian McCaffrey, and it's like you've got issues right now that you can see coming down the pipeline, then I'm more accepting of this. But if all of your players are healthy and you've got depth, like, I don't see the need personally to shake up things like this. Like, it's not that I have a problem with this trade. Justin Jefferson and James Cook for Rice, DJ Moore, and Gibbs. Like, obviously, I think Jefferson is a better fantasy option than Rice. And I think Gibbs and Cook are about the same. Like, I don't think there's that much of a difference there. Gibbs is going to be fine. Like, he's going to have a good fantasy performance at some point. So, honestly, for me, man, like, I think that it really comes down to what your record is like. Because, again, if you're 0-2 and you're bailing water right now and you need to change something up, then I can understand that. But if you're 2-0, there's just not a need to make a trade like this where you're basically just exchanging star players, right? That's really all you're doing is exchanging star players here. So I'd probably lean on the side of not doing it, but I can understand wanting to do it for sure. Andy Alvarez, what's going on? How is Akers going to do? I think Akers will be he'll be on the struggle bus this week, I think. I think Cam Akers is in for a rough go. Like, obviously, like, whenever something like this happens, it's like, whenever you find out there's a new starting running back for the week, it's obviously a good idea to go get them off the waiver wire. Because if you have the room for it, number one, you may use them. And number two, if you don't use them, you're preventing somebody else from your league to get to use him. So I'm always in favor of either picking up that guy and playing him. Like, I'm playing Carson Steele in a dynasty league this week, right? Like, I'm definitely on board with doing that. But I'm also totally on board with playing Keep Away. Like, I've played Keep Away from several people, and it's helped me in specifically, like, fantasy football playoff time. But I do think that ultimately, if you don't get Cam Akers, don't beat yourself up over it. Like, if you're going through waivers right now, and you're bidding on waivers, and you're bidding on Cam Akers tomorrow, I don't think that he's worth more than, like, $10 in Fab. Because I don't know the status of how long Mixon's going to miss time, but I do know that Akers is taking on a tough matchup against the Vikings. So I don't think it's some great matchup, and I don't think that Cam Akers is ultimately worth that much in fantasy at this point. So if you're, like I said, if you're going through waivers right now and you're debating like how much you should put on him, I would say for me personally, Akers is not anybody I would spend more than $10 on my Fab on. That's my limit with Cam Akers this week. Akers or Elliott. Okay, so yeah, let's take this one. I think in this scenario, if Akers starts, I would play Akers. I would play Akers over Zeke this week because ultimately, again, you would ride with a running back 1 on his team over a running back 1/2. Like last week, we started to see more of a shift towards Rico Dowdle. Like that's just a reality here. So I think ultimately I would prefer to play the starter over the backup, or not necessarily backup, but a guy who is not clearly the running back 1 versus a guy who the Texans are kind of like in dire straits. Like if Pierce and Mixon miss this game, it's him and Dare Ogunbowale, which I wouldn't be surprised if Ogunbowale had a decent workload himself, but I would probably pick Akers over Zeke at this point this week. Let's see what else we've got. We're answering questions right now, guys, just going from top to bottom. So if you want your question answered immediately, Super Chat is the way to go. Josh, are you higher on Pirine or Steele? Asking for a friend. I am personally higher on Steele. And I understand where people come from when they prefer Pirine. I think there's two ways to think about this one. The first way to, and I don't think either of them are necessarily wrong, to be honest. The first thing to think about is who is going to realistically handle the running back work. And by that, I mean who's going to handle the carries, right? Like who's going to handle first down, second down carries in this offense and goal line carries in this offense. I think you'd be hard pressed to convince me that Samaje Perine's going to be that guy. Samaje Perine, for the majority of his career, has been a pass catching back. That's been Samaje Perine's role in this offense for a long time. Not the offense in the league. That's been his role for a long time. Carson Steele, it's obviously hard to tell because he's a rookie. But based on what they gave him last week, it would indicate that he's going to be the lead back as far as carries go. Now, again, for me personally, I lean towards the side of having the carry guy in this offense over the pass catcher, simply because I know that there will be goal line work that he can get. I know that Carson Steele can get some goal line work if he is that carry guy. Now, again, I'm not convinced that Samaje Perine is not going to be involved. Like, I think Perine will be involved. I think there's a chance he could be their McKinnon. I don't think he's as good as McKinnon. That's why I also kind of lean Carson Steele, because I don't think Perine's particularly great. Like, McKinnon was a really good player for the Chiefs. I just don't see that with Samaje Perine as of right now. So, for me, it's for a multitude of reasons I just explained, I prefer Carson Steele over Samaje Perine. But again, I can understand where people are coming from with Samaje Perine. Johnny Pena, what's going on? Appreciate the super chat. With possibly no Kittle on top of others, is Jennings over Shakir better bet at flex? Half PPR. It's close. It is close. I think for me personally, with somebody like Jennings against the Rams, that matchup is really good. Ultimately, I don't know where to put his targets at this week with Brandon Ayuk there. Now, obviously, Jennings is involved as is in this offense. Like, he's always involved in this offense at some level. The question becomes, how much more of a target share does he get? Because honestly, like, popular, like, first reaction would be like, it'll increase, right? I'm not convinced it does necessarily. Because what I think is going to happen is the 49ers are just going to run. Like, they're going to run that much more. And they'll get Ayuk. Like, Ayuk would probably have like 8 targets in this game or 9 targets. And maybe they'd get somebody like maybe they would get somebody like, you know, maybe they would get somebody like Jordan Mason to be more involved in the passing game, right? I don't necessarily think that Jennings has a ton more fantasy upside. Now, Shakir has not been like a high upside player, right? Like, I'm not saying that. He's not been like a high upside fantasy guy, but he is the guy in Buffalo who's getting the most targets right now. I think Keon Coleman will eventually eat into that, and Keon will have the more fantasy upside in that receiving core. But as of right now, it looks like Khalil Shakir. Now, what I will say is I think Khalil Shakir is going to be in a matchup that Buffalo ultimately wins comfortably to the point where they won't need to do much in the second half throwing the ball. So I don't like the game script for Khalil Shakir and Buffalo this week. Ultimately, I think I probably am leaning towards Juwan Jennings. If Kittle is out, I think I would go with Juwan Jennings. Now, if Kittle's in, I would go with I would go with Khalil Shakir because I know the targets are going to be there, and with Kittle, it definitely minimizes Juwan Jennings' involvement. But if we don't get Kittle, I would go with Juwan Jennings over Shakir. I appreciate the super chat. JMW85, what's going on? Full PPR, Flex 1. DJ Moore, T. Higgins, JSN, Waddle, Zamir White. Starting Nico, JMO, JT, and ETN. Also, should I drop Bass for group at kicker? So your first question to flex one of these guys, I would unconscionably still go with DJ Moore. The reason why is because DJ Moore is still getting number one targets. He's still getting number one targets. Because you have to remember with DJ Moore that it's not his, he's not been the problem. He's getting open. He's doing his job. If you watch that Sunday night game against the Texans last week, he was open several times. Caleb just couldn't deliver. Now, whether or not Caleb eventually gets better, that remains to be seen, I guess. I believe that there will be better weeks ahead for DJ Moore. And this week against the Colts, I think the matchup is pretty ripe. I mean, honestly, the matchup is pretty good against the Colts secondary. They've been ripped apart for 2 weeks straight. So I think it's definitely there for DJ Moore. I'm not convinced he's playing. I keep getting a lot of T. Higgins questions. To be clear, T. Higgins just returned to practice today. Now, apparently, according to reports, he's set to return for week 3, barring a setback. I don't think this is the game I'm comfortable playing T. Higgins in a lot of situations. He missed several weeks with this injury, and ultimately I think that I want to see more from T. Higgins before I put him in over someone like DJ Moore, who's getting more targets. And JSN is definitely knocking on the door. Not there yet for me. And then with your kicker situation, I would drop Bass for group. Look, what you'll notice if you're new to my kicker rankings is that week to week, my kickers are going to vary. A lot of it is based on matchup and how these offenses are looking. So obviously you'll start to see more familiar faces throughout the year, but week to week kickers are different. Obviously, Bass ended up being a decent kicker play last week. This week I don't really want him, and Group has just kind of come into the limelight on a really good offense, and the matchup this week against the Eagles should allow them to drive the ball, right? So a lot of times I will be switching kickers in and out. That's why I have no problem. In my own leagues, I turn and burn kickers almost weekly. Honestly, I really do. I've got Kaimi Fairbairn in a couple leagues, so I'm sticking with him right now. But if I've got guys if I've got somebody like a Matt Prater or a Chris Boswell, it's I'll turn him out depending on matchup. So I would go with Group for sure. Appreciate the super chat. T Money, what's going on? Can you find my message in chat, please? And Worthy Brooks. It may take me a little bit, but I will try to find it. T Money, let's see where you are. Should I trade Mahomes plus Ridley plus London for Burrow and Chase? 10-man team is Mahomes, Jacobs, Connors, CD, London, Kincaid, DK, Jamison, Williams. Bench is Ridley, Carr, Ford, Worthy, Brooks on IR. Excuse me. So you would be sending Mahomes, Ridley, and London for Burrow and Chase. And you've got Jacobs and Connor as your running backs. I like it. CD, London, Kincaid, DK. I would prefer to have Jamar. Yeah, I would prefer to have Jamar. I mean, listen. As good as Mahomes, I think, will be, especially without Pacheco, I think Mahomes is in line for a good fantasy stretch. The reality is, if you actually sit and think about with Patrick Mahomes, just looking at his numbers, right? Not just through the first 2 weeks of this year, a lot of last year as well. He's really steady. Mahomes rarely busts, right? You can pretty much count on Mahomes in your starting lineup every single week. But Mahomes' reality, a lot of it does have to do with the reason he's a good fantasy player for many, including myself, is that you never feel like you have to make a move. You can feel pretty confident and pretty comfortable with putting him inside your lineup, right? So I think on that I think if you actually break it down to a simple level, that's kind of how, at least how I feel when I think about Patrick Mahomes, is that he really just provides me a safety net at quarterback to where I feel like I don't need to make a move. And so if you just look at the fantasy performances like themselves, like they're not really that great. Burrow, I think, is not going to finish higher than Mahomes will, but I think he's going to be capable of just as many big games. I think Burrow's just a little more streaky. So with Burrow, I think you'll have to ride out the highs and the lows. Now, with this stack right here, I've made it clear, like, the Burrow Chase stack is one of my favorites. Like, every single year, I know the potential they have. So I love the Burrow Chase stack, and that's why I would ultimately probably do this trade. And then Worthy and Brooks, I'm trying to understand what you were saying. Worthy Brooks. I mean, I think they're good depth. Honestly, I don't think Brooks is that great of a depth piece at this point. I don't really understand what you're asking, so I guess I'll just give you my thoughts on both players. Worthy, I think, is a really good buy low. I think Worthy is a really good buy low this week. I think he's going to, like I've been saying with Mahomes, I think Mahomes is in line for better fantasy production over the next month or two. Without Pacheco, they're going to have trouble balancing out this offense. So it's going to rely a lot on Mahomes. So I think that, on top of the fact that there is no Hollywood, there's no threat of it, Worthy has an open field to run through. So I just trust in the Chiefs' ability to develop him. And based on what I've seen from him, I trust his ability to be able to grow as a player this year. So I ultimately do like Worthy in the long term this season. Now with Brooks, like, unless that offense can get it together, like, I honestly have no interest. I mean, if people think it's honestly going to change, then if people honestly think it's going to change when Brooks comes in, I think you're kidding yourself. Honestly, like, Chuba is not a bad player. He's not great, and I'm not saying he's better than Jonathan Brooks necessarily. What I am saying is that the problem is ultimately this team is broken. It's a broken organization. So with Andy Dalton, like, you may see less. What you will see, I think, from Andy Dalton when he plays is less less layups missed. And by that I mean, like, Bryce Young is literally overthrowing guys in the flat that are wide open. It's like that is unacceptable. That's ultimately probably one of the reasons that they pulled him, is because they're like, dude, you just need to take a deep breath on the sidelines. So we're going to put in the Red Rifle, who is not particularly great, but he can hit those plays. You'll see less of that, right? You'll see, more completions and, like, possibly more upside from target guys like Deontay and possibly Thielen. Now, if you think that that's going to improve the running game, it may do so minimally, but not much else. Like, that's just, it's just not going to be too much more improvement, I think, for Andy Dalton and Jonathan Brooks in this backfield. So ultimately, like, I think Worthy is a great depth piece. Lots of room for more, but I really do think that he doesn't have that much upside. Jonathan Brooks. That's my problem. Appreciate the super chat. Johnny Pena, what's going on? Trade away Javonte for Cooper straight up. Amari Cooper? Just curious. I think you're saying Amari Cooper. I don't think anybody, even with Cooper Kupp's injury, I don't think anybody would take Javonte Williams for Cooper Kupp. If it's Amari Cooper, I probably would because of opportunities. Opportunities continue to be there for Amari Cooper. And they will continue to be there because the reality is he still is their number one receiver. Now, what I will say is that so far, Jerry Jeudy has been more effective for Deshaun Watson. Like, that is a fact. He has been more effective for Deshaun Watson than Amari has, but Amari still is getting the targets, and I don't think those are going to go away. Because ultimately, I do think that receiving core is headlined by Amari Cooper, and they want to get the most out of him because he is ultimately, at the end of the day, their best receiver. Ultimately, I think Javonte, his best case scenario this year is probably like a mid-end RB2. And probably like back-end RB2. Like running back 20 is probably his best case scenario. Because if they get going, it's going to be a while. Like it probably be by like mid-season or like week 10 that like around Thanksgiving time is when I could see Bo Nix like really start to improve. Because he looks like a disaster right now, man. Like it looks bad. And this offense, ultimately, of course, they don't have a pass game. They've got no run game either. So, you know, it's a gross looking offense. There's more upside, I think, for Amari than I think there is for Javonte. So yeah, I would send Javonte for Amari Cooper straight up personally. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up there for the night, guys. I appreciate y'all being in here tonight. And tomorrow, we're going to do every matchup, run through the must-start and sit defenses for Week 3 fantasy football. So make sure to stay tuned for that video. Make sure to like the video on your way out and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. The new line on Underdog, CeeDee Lamb, half a yard. So take advantage of that free pick using the link in the description, using code FN to sign up and deposit $10. And I'll see you guys at tomorrow's video.